Michelle Marie McGrath. Hello and welcome. This is Michelle Marie McGrath, your host, and today I'm delighted to be speaking to the fabulous Jody Day. Now, Jody is an author, social entrepreneur, and the founder of Gateway Women, a global friendship and support network for childless women. She is a founding member at AWOC, which is the Aging Without Children Collective, and a fellow in social innovation at Cambridge Judge Business School at Cambridge University in the UK. Her book, Rocking the Life Unexpected, 12 Weeks to Your Plan B for a Meaningful and Fulfilling Life Without Children, is an Amazon bestseller. Jody runs workshops, social events and private sessions for women coming to terms with a life that doesn't include motherhood, as well as speaking out about the issues and prejudices that childless women face. And you can find out more about Jody's work at gateway-women.com. Jody, so happy to be talking to you today. I'm so excited to have our chat and, hear all about your amazing work that you're doing in this area. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's a real privilege to be on your show.
Oh, I'm so happy to speak to you. I've been really looking forward to talking to you since I read your book actually quite some time ago now, which is, fantastic. And I think it's like the perfect manual for anybody sort of going through this experience in their life.
That's very kind of you. The check's in the post.
So obviously we're talking about, what sort of evolves when you're childless through circumstance and what that can sort of bring up in somebody's life. And so, Jody, would you mind sharing a little bit about your personal circumstance and how you came to be sort of where you are now?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm 50 now. I'll be 51 this year. And I was 29 when I started trying to conceive with my then husband. I had an abortion when I was 20. I was really ambivalent when I was very young about having children. I was really nervous. I came from a long line of women who'd had children very young, even as teenagers. And there was a definite thing as I was growing up that it wasn't the thing to do. But, my mum sort of impressed upon me that it was, I had to do other things with my life and go out and have a life and take up all these amazing opportunities that were becoming available for women. So when I got pregnant at 20, it was kind of a bit of a disaster and I was very scared. So I had an abortion and kind of thought, well, I guess I know the plumbing works kind of thing. Although that's to kind of trivialise it. It was actually quite a traumatic experience, mainly because I was just so terrified, I think, of the whole thing. Yeah, so when I started trying to conceive at 29, I presumed it would happen quite quickly, and it didn't. So I was still very confident that everything would be fine. So I didn't really start investigating why I wasn't getting pregnant for a couple of years. Had lots of tests, everything was fine. Then I had an operation called laparoscopy, which is where they send like a little camera through your belly button to have a look around. Because I thought there must have been some damage, from the abortion, and there was nothing. And in fact, the surgeon said to me as I came round, absolutely first-class property, finest uterus I've seen all week, ready to move into. You lovely young people just go away and have lots of sex. Oh. So that was the advice I got from the medical profession.
Very technical then.
Very technical. And so I went away and I kind of then, and so I'm now 33, 34, I then entered a period of what I call baby mania, which is where I did everything I could to get pregnant, including sort of, standing on my head after sex, peeing on every kind and colour of stick, 1 month having sex every single month, taking every kind of vitamin, giving up this food, taking up that food, changing my job, meditating, anything that was going that would help me get pregnant. Yeah. And I just kind of walked around the streets of London randomly putting £50 notes through people's door, because I guess I was very vulnerable to anyone who said they could help at that time. But I didn't think about IVF yet. I thought it was in the background as a kind of silver bullet solution that would definitely work. But what was happening was that my marriage was tanking. And my lovely then husband had been a workaholic when I met him, although that's something that's very acceptable. And gradually, it became a heavy drinker, became alcoholism, and then there was drug use as well. And it just became absolutely hideous. We were running a business together. I was as interior designers, because I'd given up my business in order to support him in his business for a couple of years whilst I got pregnant, if you see what I mean, because I thought his business would be the one that would support us as a family. So here I am quite a few years later now, in a business that I was good at but didn't really interest me, because I was only there to help build the brand and things like that, and I got stuck because I didn't get pregnant. So I was running the whole show with the business, keeping my husband's addiction issues away from our staff and away from clients, holding the whole show together at home. And there was a point when I was 38, I really remember it very clearly. I was in the bath. My husband then was in the bathroom, and he said, "I think we should do IVF." And I just had this absolute knowing that was incredibly sad. And I just thought, I can't bring a baby into this. Yeah. And it's very hard even to say it now. You might hear my voice is a bit choked up, because it was an incredibly maternal decision. Yeah. But it meant 6 weeks later I had a nervous breakdown. And really, when I came out of hospital, it was pretty clear. It was like the nervous breakdown is, I'm with Brene Brown on this nervous breakdown / spiritual awakening. It's like I woke up in my life, and I woke up in a nightmare. And I was like, oh my God, who made all these decisions? What is this life I'm living? And so, that was the end of my marriage. Yeah. And I think because I was so still driven by baby mania, and actually incredibly ignorant about the reality of my fertility, I thought I would just meet someone else, get married and do IVF. That was my big plan, and that's how thought through it was. It was literally, you could do it in one sentence. So I got divorced, which, was really, really awful after, we'd been together 16 years. And when you get divorced from someone, not because you don't love them anymore, but because they're kind of committing suicide in front of you slowly with drugs, it was unbelievably hideous. And I'm pleased to say that he's now 3 years into recovery, but it's been a very tough 10 years for him up until that point. So I did meet other men after my divorce, but none of them were quite right. Yeah. One didn't want to have children or try IVF because he already had them, and one did, but the relationship was incredibly volatile, and we could never get to the point where the relationship was strong enough that we felt confident to go ahead with the next stage. And so when that relationship broke down for the final time, I was 43 and a half. And I realised that was it for me, because even with my limited knowledge of IVF, and it was so limited, I thought, well, if I met someone tomorrow, I'd be 44 and a half by the time we could even think about having a baby together. And that's too late for IVF. It's done. And, so that was for me, I was, 43 and a half. I've been trying since I was 29. It was like a 15-year journey. Wow. And it ended that day. And it was a Tuesday afternoon in February. I remember the moment. Wow. It was, a
defining moment in your life.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's my story, and that was really the beginning of the next part of my story, which leads us up to, that was 43 and a half, and now I suppose I'm 50 and a half. So, 7 years.
Well, it's like one of those 7-year cycles, isn't it? It's quite a significant time frame, that, isn't it, in our lives? Wow. So that's huge. And do you think, Jody, when you look back on that, do you feel that because you suddenly came to the realisation, at that point, that it wasn't happening kind of easily or quickly for you after you, assumed everything would be okay, do you think that that's what added to the intensity of that longing?
Yeah, I became obsessed. Yeah. But looking back on it, the obsession was not straightforward, because there was also an element of not wanting to face up what was happening with my husband.
Yeah.
You know, that somehow if we could get to the next stage of our life, and he admitted this too at the time, you know, it's like he always said he'd stop partying when I got pregnant. There was a sense that we needed to move to the next stage of life so he could grow up. Yeah. There was so much complicated unconscious stuff flying around that, you know, that added to the mix of the, you know, the denial and the baby mania, and, you know, I don't know, it was a very difficult time.
Yeah, very challenging. And I suppose as well with that really forces you to look at, you know, all your beliefs to that, as thinking if your identity is so sort of entwined with that thinking, well, I am going to be a mother one day, then of course letting go of that. I mean, it's a massive process, isn't it? And would take quite a long time to.
It's excruciating, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, that February afternoon, I literally had this sensation of kind of really strong physical sensation of something kind of reconnecting inside of me, like right in my sort of belly. And it was a really strong, like a physical shock. And I was like, and it was as if two parts of my life came back together, which is that for 15 years I'd been planning and dreaming and thinking about becoming a mother. So that was like one side of me. And then the other side of me were all the other things that I wanted to do that I kept sort of putting on hold or delaying or not following. Like, I can't take that job because it doesn't have good maternity leave. But no, I can't do my master's then because I'll be pregnant with this, and I can't do that. And, you know, there was always this sense, I call it psychologically nesting. Yes. It's like I was sort of preparing a space in my life for the family that was coming. But because that took so long and because the family never came, I wasn't really living the life I was actually living. Yeah. I was kind of living a sort of weird half-life. I was in a really difficult state of limbo where I wasn't really living the life I was actually living, but neither was the life I wanted to live coming true.
I think that's so natural, though, that you were sort of doing that, and it is how we're conditioned in our society. I mean, it's so common that you would be thinking, well, of course that's going to happen, and you're trying to plan ahead and all of that, and that you're, you know, like you say, mentally preparing yourself for that. And so then when you're having that realisation that, okay, that's not going to be a part of my life experience, I mean, it's a massive shock to come to terms with.
It did feel like a shock, and I recall that I kind of went into the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and I found myself thinking, you know, well, if I look back to when I was 20 and I think of how I felt about my life and the time ahead of me, I thought, you know, obviously I had the the confidence of being 20, was the sense I could sort of do whatever I set my mind to. And then I thought, well, why can't the years, you know, why can't the next 30 years feel like that? But then what was really shocking was I thought to myself, when was the last time I had a thought like that? Because I realised that I had lost the ability to have any alternative ideas about my future other than becoming a mother. That I'd sort of, you know, I'd spent so long putting off those thoughts and feelings that I'd sort of become, you know, imaginatively like a one-track mind. It was like I had no dreams left.
Yeah.
Was really something. I was like, oh my goodness, it's like, where has she gone?
Yeah.
You know, where has that woman gone that, you know, always had ideas about things and what she wanted to do and stuff like that? And I thought, you know, she feels dead. that version of me.
Well, it sounds like maybe she was just having a sleep for a while, but I suppose
a long time.
Well, it's just almost like going through that shock and the grief of that, but then I suppose at the same time you were then coming to terms with the fact, actually, I've now got all of these amazing possibilities that are available to me, you know, and I just maybe need to look at what is it that I want to explore and immerse myself in.
I imagined it would be like that, but that's not how it felt.
Yeah, of course.
Which is, I didn't have lots of ideas of things I wanted to do. Yeah. I couldn't think of any opportunities. And what I didn't realise is that I then entered a profound period of grieving. Yes. But nobody, including myself, knew it was grieving. This was when I started looking for support from the medical profession, from the therapeutic profession, from books, from blogs. There was nothing, absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So I did begin my training to become a psychotherapist because that had always been a goal. And you're going to laugh at this, I thought, well, I can't become a psychotherapist until I've become a mother, because if I don't become a mother, I won't understand the human condition. So I have to say, that the prejudices that people have against us, we have them too.
Yeah.
And then I thought, actually, I think I've got quite a lot of experience of the human condition by now.
Absolutely.
After coping with the things I'd already dealt with. So I did go ahead and I applied to college and I got in, and I'm nearly completing my training. I'm in my last taught year now, 6 years.
Fantastic.
And it was when I was doing my psychotherapy training, and we did a weekend training course on working with grief. We were doing this workshop and I was really getting it. I was totally understanding this material. And I kind of went home and I thought, I think that this is what I'm experiencing. I think I'm grieving. So I sat down and I mapped my emotional experience and the emotional experience of the women that I was meeting through writing my Gateway Women blog. And I thought, this is a completely perfect fit. Oh my goodness, I'm grieving. And it was such an amazing moment because, number one, there was a name for what I was experiencing. Number two, I'm not going crazy. And number three, this is going to be over one day. That's just such a relief.
And had you experienced intense grief before, Jody? Because it sounds like it was quite an unfamiliar experience for you. So had you not sort of lost anyone close to you where you'd had an experience of that?
I had, but not to this extent. And I think it's the combination of the existential grief.
Yeah.
All the things that won't happen. So, never have a first day at school. Never have all those photos, never have a family holiday, never make a birthday cake. There is a kind of, I did lose a boyfriend when I was quite young. And, I did go on to marry someone else. Yeah. But once you are childless, that's it. And you're going to be childless for the rest of your life. I would imagine perhaps losing a parent maybe feels this bad because nothing can, you can never have another parent. I think also the alienation, the isolation, the sense of losing my peer group, and the way people thought about me because I was childless, the loss of my identity as a woman. I wouldn't say I was just grieving not being able to have children. I was grieving almost the complete annihilation as my identity as a woman.
Yeah, and your friendships, if your friends were all sort of having children and stuff at that time as well, obviously that can feel very kind of alienating. And did you experience a lot of that with your friends?
Friends had children because, I'd been trying for so long that most of my friends already had kids. Yeah. And I was godmother and involved in some of their lives. But I was making a huge effort in many cases to stay involved in people's lives. Not in every case. Some of my friends were really understanding. But I think once I knew I definitely wasn't going to be having kids, you see, I always thought that their children were going to be my friends' children. Yeah. There was a sense that this hasn't happened for me yet. And it was a definite no. It was too painful for me to be around some of them. And I'm very close to my ex-husband's family, through whom I have nephew and nieces. And it was actually too painful even to be around some of them for a few years. It was just excruciating. I withdrew a lot. It was too painful to be around. Yeah. And also people just make the most hopeless but well-meaning comments about why don't you just adopt, or having children's not all it's cracked up to be, or why don't you have mine, or really it's not so bad. Whatever they are, and it just breaks your heart when you're grieving.
It's so unhelpful, isn't it? And it's funny actually, a client was asking me yesterday about that, and I was going to put this question to you of how you deal with those inappropriate questions that are just kind of inane, or just that thing of, oh, have you got kids? Oh, didn't you want them? And just, these assumptions that are so kind of invasive at times.
I think it depends on who the person is, what the situation is. People are a bit clueless about it. It is still a socially acceptable question. Yeah. And I think our society needs to catch up with how many people that could potentially hurt.
Yes.
I think it needs to move out of being a social question to being a very personal question. So I'm not this kind of person, but some of the things that, some slightly feistier gateway women have been known to say, usually to strangers, because this is a crash and burn, a crash and burn answer. Someone asks, someone, do you have kids? And she says no. And they're like, why not? And she's like, well, actually, I didn't know that we were going to get that personal straight away. How much do you earn? It's just like, I'm sorry, this is private.
It's really astonishing. I had a molar pregnancy just before my marriage ended, and I remembered being at a dinner. It was, with a friend, and somebody, it was a friend of theirs I didn't know very well, asked me kind of immediately, have you got kids? And just started going off down this. And I was really sensitive, obviously, about it at the time. And I thought, I just don't really want to have this conversation. It's so rude. And so I just said, completely deadpan, I'm infertile, actually. And they said, oh, really? And I said, no, I'm not. But it's not really any of your business. And I could be, couldn't I, for all you know? And that could be really hurtful. And, obviously, that was the end of the conversation. Their face was really shocked. And I thought, well, that was probably not a great thing to say, but at the time I just felt so, sensitive.
Well, that person probably will be more careful in the future. One hopes. I mean, I found that my answer has changed over time.
Yeah.
Now that I'm through my grief, and I've been in a really good space now for about 3 years, maybe slightly, between 3 and 4 years, I've been in a really good place. I used to say, unfortunately not, or no, I wasn't that lucky, or something. So it kind of, they knew I wasn't a kid hater. Yes. Although I have to say, it's a fantasy, this idea that there even are these people who don't have children because they hate kids. I don't meet these people. The women I know who've chosen not to have children are mostly lovely. It's just that parenting's not what they want to do with their lives, and I really respect that.
And they've generally given it a lot of considered thought over a long time.
Sometimes a lot more thought than people who aren't really cut out for parenting give before they have kids.
That's right.
Absolutely. So this idea that people who don't have children hate kids is an absolute myth.
Absolutely.
And it's one. And I have child-free friends, and they're lovely. And I kind of am a bit envious. I wish I'd known I didn't want to have children. It would have saved me 15 years. I imagine it would have saved me 15 years of grief. Because there's also the idea that choosing to be child-free is an easy decision. And my experience of women who've made that choice is that it's a decision they have to keep revisiting.
Totally. And over a long time, generally.
So for me now, I'm not sure what I would say now, because it's interesting. The idea of just saying no is really odd, not saying anything else. But if you think about it, if someone says, do you live in London? Just as a social question, or do you live in Sydney? You're unlikely to say no and not say anything else.
Yeah.
You'll probably say, no, I don't live in Sydney, I live in such and such, or but I'd really like to move to Sydney one day, or you know what I mean? Or no, I live in London. But to kind of just say no creates this kind of real sort of social tumbleweed moment where everyone's a bit shocked and doesn't know what to do next, which is why people can jump in with these really inane comments. We call them bingos, which is that, that on a really bad day you could get a full house, It's like, why don't you adopt? Have you thought of this? Have you thought of internet dating? Have you tried IVF? It's like, why don't you have a womb transplant? Whatever it is, why don't you do it on your own? Or you're not too old, or whatever it is. Like,
yes, or these miracle baby stories.
There is a word. The thing about miracles is the clue is in the word. They're not normal and they're not repeatable. They're miracles. They happen.
You've still got time, and if you meet the right person, these things can happen, and then you hear this story of somebody who was engaged and pregnant in like a 2-week period.
You met this woman who kind of, she met a man at the bus stop.
Yeah.
She was in remission, he was on remand, they had twins, and it's like, it's some mad story.
It really is.
But it's a way of not hearing your pain.
Yes.
It's just whatever we do, let's not talk about this awful situation you're in. And they've already made an assumption that it's an awful situation and you can't talk about it. They're not actually at that moment. They're no longer in a conversation with you. They're freaking out.
Yeah, thinking, oh God, why did I ask that?
Well, that's a good question. So I'm thinking that my new answer might be, in a kind way, if it's possible to do this, no, I don't have children, but I'm really curious as to why you ask.
Yes.
Because I'd just really like to start a dialogue about, why do you think it's okay to ask that when the chances are I might not? Or wouldn't it be more appropriate, if someone's got children, to wait until they mention them?
Yes.
I think, but I'd love to open a channel about that in the culture, so that it's not about, don't say this and you did a wrong thing and you hurt. I'd like to say, can we think about why we're doing this? And another way maybe to have this conversation that we don't all freak out about.
I mean, it's not, I think for the majority of people, they're not being intentionally unkind. They're just being thoughtless. They're just making small talk. But you think, but it's not a small subject.
That's the thing. That's what we need to get across. This is no longer a small subject.
Yeah.
One in 5 women is turning 45 without having had children. 10% of those have chosen that. 10% of them have medical infertility or other medical issues that prevent them having children. 80% of them are childless by circumstance. And that means they haven't met a partner. Their partner already has children. They were looking after someone during their fertile years. They couldn't get the time off work. They couldn't afford it. They've got housing issues. Whatever it might be, there are things that have prevented them from being able to have a family during their fertile window. And a really important reason they haven't had children is because they haven't got pregnant accidentally on purpose.
That's right.
They have, they've been honourable women. And now being treated like idiots.
That's right. And, it's interesting, this term of, social infertility as well, Jody. I don't know what it's like in London, but, I've been in Sydney now for a long time. And I know so many women in their 30s and 40s who would love to meet somebody and have a family, and they really had intended that, but just cannot meet a suitable partner. It's quite a phenomena, it seems.
Well, I think there is some really important reasons why this is happening.
Yeah.
I call our generation, the generation sort of born in the, after the sexual revolution, the shock absorber generation for the sexual revolution. Because in one generation, we've had women's access to the pill, and birth control, legalised and safe abortion, women's access to higher education, women's access to the professions, and fertility treatments in one generation. It is phenomenal what's happened and how it has changed the situation between men and women. But one of the things it's done, which no one's really sort of being upfront about, is the fact that we had a huge boost in the number of women going into higher education and going into professions. Yeah. We did not have a corresponding increase in the number of men doing so.
Yes.
So what we have is a generation where there are many, many more educated women looking for partners who are similarly educated or higher educated. Because much as we have this new idea, that women can earn their own living and be independent and have their own lives, we still have this old paradigm running as well, that women marry up, that they marry a man of higher status economically, financially, or at least taller than them. We've still got this really old conditioning running at the same time. What we also have in our generation is we have men who are less educated, what in the olden days, in industrial times, was called blue-collar workers, and their potential partners, who perhaps, let's say for example's sake, before the sexual revolution would have trained to be nurses or secretaries, have become lawyers and doctors.
Yeah.
So they're actually also amongst that kind of group of men, there is a sense that they've been unpartnered and there's a lot of resentment there. So in China, where they've been quite frank and open about this, they call it the crisis of A1 women and D4 men.
It's really interesting.
Because they have a similar issue with a great many unmarried, university-educated women. And the more, in our generation, the more educated you are, the less likely you are to have children. So much so that university educated women are 50%. 50% of them will be childless.
Yeah, I can so see that totally. And I was
so
just
although
thinking,
it's 1 in 5 in the general population, it's 5 out of 10.
Yeah,
university educated women.
And will be rapidly increasing, no doubt, over the next 10 years as well. I was just thinking, like, most of the women that I know in my circle, my friends, and that, the majority of them are self-employed, highly educated, and intelligent, got so much going for them. And yeah, you're right, it's very
there are lovely partners out there for women like that, but they tend to kind of pretty much all be gone by the time you're 30, because there's actually not there's not an equal balance between the sexes of people who are, awake, alive and educated like that.
Yeah, or if they're like coming out of, say they've gone into like a marriage in their 20s or something like that, and they might be coming out of that like a long-term thing, and then, they're open to something else. But
they get snapped up pretty quick.
Yeah, totally. And then also, like we were saying, again, so at that stage as well, like you could meet somebody and they've already got, teenage children or whatever, and they might not want any more. So,
exactly.
So that's a big factor as well, I feel.
So I think it's important that we kind of put our situation into the social and economic context of our times, because the line that we're being fed by the media and by the culture is that it's all down to our crappy choices, or being too picky, or this, that and the other. But we're actually living through an extraordinary moment in the history of dating and mating.
Absolutely.
And in 100 years' time, when they, if our civilization survives that long, when they look back on this time, it will be a really pivotal, we are a pivotal generation.
We really are. It really is like on the edge of this kind of, dramatic sort of social change, really.
Yes.
It's so fascinating. It's such an interesting sort of time in our lives. So, did you ever feel at any point, Jody, that you were going to be speaking and writing and sort of campaigning for this sort of topic?
No idea at all.
It's extraordinary, though, how life can unfold, can't it?
Yeah, I couldn't be more surprised. I started writing my blog pretty much 4 years ago. It was like the first week of April 4 years ago. And I got my first piece of PR the day after my first blog was published.
My goodness.
Which was extraordinary. And then I carried on blogging. And then someone said, you really should give a talk. And I was really struggling at the time. I was struggling with the breakdown of this relationship. My business partnership had gone sour. I was in the perimenopause, but I didn't know it. And I was really struggling with anxiety, which was not something I'd ever really dealt with before. I'd have bouts of depression throughout life, but I'd never had to deal with anxiety before. And so my confidence was I was just shattered. And so it took a huge amount of courage to kind of give this talk. And I gave it at a sort of women's business sort of club. And it was only to 8 women, and actually 4 of them were people I knew who I asked to come along and support me. But, I did it. I gave my first talk, and I talked about grief, and I talked about, coming through the tunnel, and, the things that are very much a theme of my work. And there was a journalist in the audience who then said, I'd really like to interview you. This is really interesting stuff, and no one's talking about this. So I gave an interview to her, which was actually published quite some time later. It was published sort of the following February, and this was like June. It was published in The Guardian, and it was just massive. It went completely viral. Brilliant. And so that autumn, so after giving the talk, that autumn, women sort of who were on my blog and who were meeting me at events and things were saying, we love kind of what you seem to be doing. We kind of love what you're doing with your, with your thoughts and feelings around this. Because my thoughts and feelings were quite developed by this time, because I've been thinking about it and writing about it, not necessarily on my blog, but for a couple of years. And obviously I was doing my psychotherapy training, so I was really getting a lot of input in how to think through this stuff. So I said, okay, well, I'll do a group. And I didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if I had anything to teach. I didn't know if anything that I'd experienced could be translated into help for someone else. I thought maybe this is just the way I've got through it. And I had 5 women who came along to the first 10-week program. We met on a Saturday morning, and it transformed their lives and it transformed my life, because that's when I realised actually I was able to help others. And it was, that was 3 years ago now.
Wow.
And here we are.
What a busy 3 years you've had.
Yes.
It just goes to show how much need there is. And how many women there are out there who really do need that sort of support, and to feel that they're not on their own going through these experiences and all of the emotions and beliefs and everything that come up as they're going through that. So it's really inspiring. And so
I think my website's been seen by like 500,000 women around the world. Got meetup groups in the UK, Ireland, USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. My book's been a bestseller. It's just, it's extraordinary, the demand.
It's so interesting to see how that's going to unfold over the next few years, and what's going to sort of come from that. And also, I know that you're involved with like the Aging Without Children collective as well, which is again another really fascinating area, because obviously we're an aging population, and there are going to be all of these people that don't have sort of children, which again, there's that whole myth of, well, that when you're older, your kids are going to look after you, which is there's no guarantee of that anyway, but it's really interesting how sort of obviously that is becoming, an area of importance to focus on.
Yeah, and I think also for men too, because the research shows that the outcomes for men on their own aging are actually, significantly poorer than for women. So that's why it's really important that the AWOC work, the Aging Without Children work, is very much for men and women. And I think the stories that we're now starting to share as women about being childless, I think are gradually helping men to open up about it, because, the statistics are actually are almost the same for men, but people aren't aware that men might struggle with this. There's this idea that if a man isn't a father, he isn't a father yet. There's also a lack of awareness that sort of, I can't remember the statistic. I think the statistic is that 60% of visits to fertility clinics are to do with male factor infertility.
Right.
And certainly in the case of, the overall statistics of infertility, it's 1/3 female, 1/3 male, and the rest is unknown. So like my experience is I had unexplained infertility. But I think it's very hard for men to find a voice to speak about this. And people often ask me, is there a gateway men? And, there isn't as yet. And I'm not the person to do it.
And do you get approached by many men on the topic,
yes,
Jody? Yeah,
I do. Yes. And they come to me and they say, where is the thing for us? And, I share the work that there is. There's a British academic called Robin Hadley, who's one of my colleagues in AWOC. But there is the beginning of research around it, but there still, as yet, isn't really much support around it. And I think the support will need to be very different than the kind of emotional, social, collective approach that works for women. I have to say, I don't know what men need to help them through this. But I'm open to finding out and helping that happen too.
Of course. And obviously they're not always, sort of the most forthcoming with these very intensely sort of personal sort of topics, as we know, so
to be a man in our culture is to be strong, to be dominant, not to be vulnerable.
That's right.
So this hits on all of them.
Of course, and anything like that, it's just that whole sort of slight against your masculinity, all of that kind of thing. So you can just imagine it's quite excruciating, the thought of even sort of talking publicly. For a lot of men, they just wouldn't, it just wouldn't even enter their head as, so it'd be very interesting to see, what unfolds over the coming years. Obviously, again, there's really a need for it.
Yes, there is. And I think we need to be more compassionate and aware that I think there's a few things around the gender issue. The idea that women are childless because they've chosen it, or because they left it too late, or it's often this idea that childlessness is a female issue.
Totally.
When in actual fact, it does take two to make a baby. And I notice that all of the articles are always about women leaving it too late. Yeah. There's real. I think we need to kind of actually broaden it and look at it actually as a male and female issue.
Absolutely.
And also to be aware that that not all men who are childless chose that or are completely okay about it.
I think that it's interesting. I've seen a couple of articles recently on that topic, actually, about, again, how they would have been open to that, but it just didn't happen, or that, or that inexplicable infertility as well. So it's such an interesting area. So fascinating, really. So now that obviously you've been through such a huge journey with this, like over the last years, can you sort of, I suppose now you sort of see this from, like, hindsight's always a great thing, but can you now sort of see and notice, the amount of sort of gifts and benefits that you're sort of experiencing through having gone through that experience, and now, of course, all this amazing work that you're involved in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not being able to have children broke my heart.
Yeah.
It absolutely broke my heart and broke me. Yeah. But it did actually break me open in a profound way that has changed me. So it's like, childlessness broke my heart, but grief healed it bigger. I think it has helped me become the woman I was meant to be.
Absolutely.
Which is a very compassionate and resilient and kind woman. I think I would have been a great mum.
Yeah.
However, I think I am able to use my mother's heart in a different way through the work I do now. And it's actually deeply satisfying to me. If I had my time over again, I'd love to be a mum.
Yeah.
But I am not unhappy about the way things have turned out. I love my life, which even saying it out loud, there's part of me that goes, really? It's like, yeah, really. I love my life. I think sometimes possibly being unpartnered now feels some days a bit tough compared, because there's the, single, childless, spinster sort of stereotype, which I so don't fit that or believe in it. But sometimes it's sometimes it's tough being single all the time.
Yeah.
But I also know that, having been married and having been in a really difficult situation when I was married, sometimes being married sucks too.
Absolutely.
So I'm quite comfortable with the idea that I might be single for the rest of my life. I'm not sort of, rather like you saying, coming to that realisation, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but if it is, that's okay, because I actually really, really love my life.
And you've got a very full life.
I feel really excited. I mean, there was a point, when I was going through the depths of my grief, when I thought, how am I going to fill my time between now and death? It just felt like one day after another that I just had to get through. Yeah. I mean, that's grief. It was just like, and actually there were some days that were so bad, I just thought, I don't know if I want to live the rest of my life if it feels like this. I mean, it was that bad.
Yeah.
And there was a day I remember when I just thought, well, I'm just going to lie on the floor and I'll get up when I can think of a compelling reason to do so. And I was there all day, looking at this crack in the skirting board, because I felt so completely pointless as a human being.
Yeah.
In the depths of my grief. I just couldn't think of a reason. I mean, I didn't actually want to kill myself.
Yeah.
But I couldn't see the point in living. It was very, very deep. I had a wonderful therapist I was working with at the time who really helped me through that dark night of the soul. And I think it brought up a great deal of other ungrieved losses to be healed from my childhood. A lot from the end of my marriage. A lot of sadnesses. That's the thing about profound grief, is that usually there's a cue.
Yes.
Once you start properly grieving, they're like, right, she's grieving, right, let's clear this all out.
That's right. It's so true. It's so true. I had a very similar experience of that, where it was almost like, what is this now? It was like the next thing and the next thing, just peeling off layers in that space of, it's almost like once you open the door to allow those feelings to really feel them, it really opens up, you know, it can just seems to be quite an endless thing, really.
Except, well, beautifully, it's not endless. It's
that's right.
Process.
Yeah.
I mean, I now understand that grief is a form of love.
Yeah.
Because we only grieve that which we have loved. And it actually is a loving process which heals us in order to love our life again, to be open to love again, and and to be open to loving life again. And the thing I learned through my work and through working with, thousands of women now, is that grief is a relation. It is love, so it's a relational emotion. Yeah. You cannot grieve on your own. You cannot grieve in your head. Time does not heal grief. Only grieving heals grief. Yes. And a lot of the grief that people are experiencing are what I think of as unrequited grief. It's like unrequited love. It's incredibly painful because it's grief that needs to be related to. Yeah. And women we don't understand in our culture what grief is and what we need to do our grief work. It has to be a dialogue of some kind. It doesn't have to be a grief counsellor, doesn't have to be a workshop, but it needs to be more than thinking about it or reading a book about it. It could be commenting on blogs. It could be, being part of an online community like the Gateway Women online community or Lisa Mantefield's Life Without Baby community. You have to have some kind of dialogue. Yeah. So that you can get that feeling. Just when I read those comments in my first blogs where women wrote back and they said, I thought I was the only woman in the world having these thoughts. And I'm not. And literally, I've got goosebumps now, Marie, because it's just like, oh my God, it's not just me. And those are like the most healing things you can hear when you're grieving, is that, that you're not alone. Someone else understands your pain.
Totally. And it's just, and that's the beauty of, isn't it, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable in that way and be very open and honest and let ourselves feel those feelings, however uncomfortable or overwhelming they are. That's what creates the shift as well, isn't it?
Yes. Well, when I think of how extraordinary kind of the shift has been in the UK, of which my work has, contributed to it, the open, how me being open and vulnerable has opened the door for so many other people to be open and vulnerable. I mean, the amount of articles and stuff that's in the press now is extraordinary.
There is. It seems to be everywhere at the moment. It's very topical, isn't it?
Although I do still get quite sad when some of the most moving articles are often written anonymously, and I still find that very sad. Yeah. But it's a step in the right direction. But sometimes I feel like the only childless woman in Britain, because it's like when I ask for someone who's prepared to be named and photographed for a newspaper article, there aren't that many people who yet don't feel ashamed. It's still a big shame issue.
Yeah, it's still very taboo, isn't it? It's a look. I mean, that will change, and it is changing. It is changing.
Well, I see us as the next sort of big minority that's finding its voice. In a way, I consider this work to be parallel to the work of that the generation before has done around, homosexuality and lesbian, the LGBT community.
Just like they have done an
amazing job, in the last 20 years, 30 years, to change the way people view people with LGBT identity and also themselves. It is no longer acceptable to insult people, and it's against the law, I've lost my words, but, it's against the law to show prejudice against them.
Yeah.
And I think that our time is coming.
I think you're right, just in that thing of, it's really, I suppose like the underlying message is that really standing in the truth of who you are and what your situation is, whatever that is. And, really sort of being quite brave, I think, in being vulnerable and just being open. And just expressing yourself however that is, and, realising every life is equally valid.
Yes.
And obviously you're doing a wonderful job in sort of spreading that message and helping to get those conversations out there, and for women to feel that they're not on their own going through these experiences, which can be incredibly isolating and, very challenging to deal with.
Well, quite often when women join my online community and they join and they share a tiny bit of their story, and they'll get like 50 women writing back saying, welcome, you found the right place. And they're just like, they say, I've been feeling so alone, and like, I just can't believe the welcome you've given me. And just this sense of kind of finding your tribe after being so isolated is just so wonderful.
No, it is. It must be extremely gratifying.
I'm actually very proud of all the Gateway Women members, because I have to say they're a pretty awesome bunch.
Yeah.
Women who are coming through this situation and who are seeking support and are being vulnerable. I have to say we're a pretty amazing bunch of women.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are your plans for the future, Jody? Sort of moving forward, what are your sort of big dreams to, make things even sort of on a larger scale than they are already? If that's
things are kind of happening, which is extraordinary. I mean, I've just signed a book deal with Pan Macmillan in the UK to republish a second edition of my book next year, to come out on International Women's Day 2016.
Brilliant.
And that's going to be a revised and expanded version. And that means it'll be in bookshops and libraries, and it's going to be translated into other languages. So that's a really important part of my work, is that, it'll be available more globally to more women. Because my metric is always, how many women can I help?
Yeah.
That's how I kind of think about opportunities. I've also been made a fellow in social innovation at Cambridge University for my work with Gateway Women. So once I've finished, finally, my psychotherapy training, I'll be getting more involved with kind of training the next generation of leaders at Cambridge Judge Business School, and really trying to embed the idea of social and emotional intelligence into business leadership. So that's going to be quite, I want to sort of spread the message about diversity.
Yes.
And I think, through the work at Cambridge and with AWOC, with the Aging Without Children Collective, really start to get our issues being taken seriously at a social and political level, in policy and in planning. Because, we're 25% of the population. Sorry, you can't ignore us anymore.
No, and it's only going to increase quite quickly if the last 10 years are anything to go by.
And we're not a bunch of sort of weeping weirdos. It's not just what we need from the culture. We have so much to offer.
Yeah.
It's very foolish to ignore us. Thinking of women in particular, and the time and the generation we're living through, there have never been in the history of Western civilization so many women alive in their 40s and 50s not bringing up children. Yeah. Educated, liberated, intelligent, evolved women. We are an extraordinary resource at a time when, our culture is in desperate need of a change of course.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's a coincidence that women like you and I, and all of the women we know, are ready to do something big. The world needs us.
Absolutely. There's so much change occurring. It's quite extraordinary. I think this is a really exciting time to be alive. I mean, not that I've been alive at other times that I can remember, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's very exciting. Imagine
if we can find a way to give the hearts that we have, these mothers' hearts, to the world. Our friends and family who have children, don't have the time to be involved in that kind of thing at the moment, and that's fine. They're hopefully bringing up a wonderful next generation, but we can get shit done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so inspiring, and like you say, I know so many amazing women. Like, my life's full of them, And
isn't it wonderful?
It really is. It's quite astonishing. I mean, often I just reflect and think, wow, seriously, like, everybody I know is kind of, doing very inspiring work and helping so many people in what they're doing with their services. And, a lot of them are doing really motivational work and sort of all sorts of groups and speaking. And it's really inspiring.
Yeah. No, I'm inspired, and it's been, really lovely meeting you and listening to another inspiring woman. I'll add you to my list now of inspiring women I know.
No, and I'm really looking forward to like then the new edition of your book coming out. I've got it. I do recommend it to a lot of women, and so I think it's such a fantastic handbook. I feel it just guides through all the different areas and processes for things for people to think about and different stages that they're at when they're thinking about moving forward and then creating something that's very fulfilling for them. So it really is like a manual, I feel.
I hope so. I mean, I certainly thought about it. What would have been helpful to me when when I was in that situation. And something I would suggest is that women get together, with the book and sort of work through it. Do a chapter a week or a chapter a month with other childless women. It's a really powerful process, and you really get to know each other and on a deep level, which is lovely.
No, I think that's a great idea. It really is, and it's like so kind of powerful to support each other going through that process. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm so, thrilled to have spoken to you about all of this, and I feel even more inspired now.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I think we could probably talk for quite a lot longer.
Yes, and I'm sure we'll speak again.
So maybe we'll do another one next year after some of my plans have come to fruition.
Absolutely. We'll do something around International Women's Day, maybe. Yay! That would be brilliant. Yeah, and you'll have to come out to Sydney.
I have to. I've got so many people who want me to come to Sydney. I just need to finish my psychotherapy training. That's how all of my sentences finish at the moment. When I finish my training.
No, that's great. Well, I look forward to that. No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.